Lorcana OP Tour Miami was the largest event in Disney Lorcana history to date. 214 players ended up being the event for over 256 registered players. Unfortunately, not everyone could make it there. Today, we're going to break down the best decks from the top 32, the standouts from the event, all the information you need to know when you understand how this ridiculously large turn of events actually came to a finish with the winner. So let's get right on into the breakdown. Now, I'd like to note here the meta at a glance shows that there was 237 registered players. This actually isn't true information. What ended up happening is the doc that we were working off of had multiple of the same player registrations from either a modified deck or a change deck. So the total number is 214. I just don't have that breakdown on hand. So we're going to use this as clarity. Everything is pretty much the same, just, minuses obviously down to 214. But as you can see here, a Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst split at 28% each. There was one more Amber Steel than Ruby Amethyst, which means, yes, I was wrong. There was more Amber Steel than Ruby Amethyst. That's okay. I feel really comfortable being tied at 28%. Can't win them all, right? Now, of course, the interesting thing here was there were 24 Emerald Amethyst decks, which was 10% of the metagame. And sad to report, deck didn't do very well at all. There was 0 Emerald Amethyst in top 32. So, third most played deck, 0 representation in the winner's bracket. Definitely not a good sign for Emerald Amethyst fans. Your next showing is Amber Sapphire and Amber Ruby, both coming in at 5%. There was one Amber Sapphire in top 16. There was one Amber Ruby in top 24. We'll be looking at both of those deck lists in this. There was 9 Emerald Steel, which was 4% of the metagame, 2 of which finished in top 32, 1 of which finished in the top 8. Amethyst Sapphire was at 9%, or was it 4% with 9? One of those was also in the top 32. We're going to take a look at that. And of course, there were other. The other was a general 17%. So, realistically, when you look at this stat, it's pretty sweet because we can see that that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decks that had 9 or more players. And then the other is obviously an assumption of that. And the crazy thing is in top 16, one of those others was actually listed. So pretty crazy to consider that in every bracket, we saw a successful winning deck from at least one of these, except for Emerald Amethyst. Unfortunately, that deck did not come out well. It did not do well at all in this, Amber Steel heavy metagame. And we're going to discuss those things to come. But let's take a look at the top 16 performers. So the top 16 was consistent of 9 Amber Steel, 4 Ruby Amethyst, 1 Amber Sapphire, 1 Emerald Sapphire, and 1 Emerald Steel. Now, I know people are looking at that and saying, oh, there's only, 5 decks there or 2 decks there, right? I kept hearing that this was a 2-deck metagame. And while the decks were obviously more successful than everything else, if you go back to that, scene a second ago, you're talking about 65 plus players playing Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst. By default, those numbers were going to exist. In all honesty, I would have been more reluctant to see 6 Amber Steel and 6 Ruby Amethyst rather than 9 and 4 or something like that. But we could have seen, in all honesty, even a few more Ruby Amethyst potentially, making these numbers even less. But getting the 3 of decks in top 16 is a big deal. It does prove that these decks have the potential to be more successful. To see other decks in the top 32 and also, the winning bracket is just another thing that showed that this deck has potential to win and succeed in these events. And first and foremost, if you really go and look at the top 16 deck list, there will be a description. The link will be in the description for them. These decks, across 9 Amber Steel decks, there was 5 or 6 different versions of Amber Steel. And then even the 4 Ruby Amethyst, they're all really different. They all make really interesting decisions. We're going to check out what I thought was the most interesting and potentially the best list in this video, but it's definitely not a 2-deck metagame. And even if it was a 2-deck metagame, within the 2 ink combinations, it would still be closer to like a 6 deck meta game just through those combinations because of the variations that we're seeing on those decisions and decks. But it's just not true. You're going to see that there's at least 5 to 6 other in combinations that are going to be warranted and honestly playable moving forward. So let's take a look at some of the information from the event as a whole. I'd really like to shout out inkdecks.com. This is a new website that I found recently. And in all honesty, it's incredible. It's awesome. What it's doing is that every single time there's a reported event, it has a file to go on and look for it with the deck list. You can, export them out just as everything else. But this is the only website I've seen so far that are really interested in reporting tournaments, other aside from ours, where we're putting up some photo galleries for everyone to find. This is a straight tournament hub. And I spoke with the designer and creator of this website over last week when I first found it. And I really wanted to give them a shout out. If you're looking for up-to-date reports and really organized very, very well, inkdecks.com is doing a phenomenal job. And that's where I got all of the deck lists for this event. They went through the extra effort of taking the images from PBG and creating the deck list and adding them to the website. So shout out to them. Had to give them a quit hit. Now let's get into the top 32 decks. So let's talk about one of the top 32 standouts, Wade Wilhelmi. If I got your name wrong, very apologetic of me. I'm so sorry. Please hit me up in the comments and let me know. This was a really sweet deck that finished 22nd overall in the event. Got him myself some prizing. And, it's a standout because this was the only deck that I could find in the top 32 that was for this in combination. There was only 9 registered Amethyst Sapphire decks in total. So being one of 9 of a 214 player event, huge shout out to you being successful with this particular list. And, if we break it down, it just looks like a general ramp deck looking to win the game through Elsas and Ursulas, utilizing the card draw of Maleficent, the Queen, Friends on the other side, and the removal package of Hades and Let It Go. And of course, being able to pressure the game really well with cards like Maleficent, Uninvited, utilizing Phil to, you know, really buff up Grandma Tails and Mickey's for favorable trades and things like that. I really enjoyed this list, and honestly, a shout out to Donald Duck strutting itself. That could have been an absolute difference maker in some of the matchups to get him into the winner's bracket in the top 32. It's a card that I really enjoy and I think is actually fairly underplayed. Everything else here looks pretty run of the mill. If it were up to me, I would say Jafar Keeper of Secrets is a card that I would consider looking around for other things. We're going to be talking about in the top 16 and a deck that played the 4-cost Elsa to be able to shift Elsa Spirit of Winter onto. That would be a card that I would absolutely consider adding to this list if I was looking to make changes moving forward. But all in all, shout out to Wade. Really good standout deck in top 32. The next standout deck for me is our team deck. I did not play or participate in the event, but of course, my co-host of the podcast and of the channel, Scott Lannis, was able to finish top 32 with Amber Ruby. Our other teammate, Christian Young, who came, was 4-2 going into round 7, and unfortunately dropped round 7 and round 8. Mostly, he said to his own play mistakes. He just said he played really poorly on the day, but he was 4-2. He was in the winner's bracket. He was in the running for a potential 6-2 finish and just didn't make it done. But all in all, Scott playing this deck, he only had 3 game losses. So let's take a look at it. Amber Ruby was a deck that had very little hype built around it. There were some videos reported on it. There were also there were 11 registered versions of this deck. However, when I was able to go and look at them, none of the other versions were utilizing Rockstar Stitch. And I think because of that, it made their Ruby Amethyst deck matchup a lot worse. Rockstar Stitch, at the end of the day, just creates another way to draw out and be ahead of Be Prepared and kind of recover from Be Prepared. And because of that, I think it's a key factor in Amber Ruby. And if you really want to play this in combination, I would absolutely include it in your list. I know we've seen some other reports, but in all of our findings with this particular list, Rockstar Stitch was the key factor in the Ruby Amethyst matchup. Everything else, you're honestly a pretty good deck against. I It's for me and for us, it was very hard to find a specific key weakness. Obviously, being on the draw against Emerald and they see the correct curves, you're not able to keep up, and you don't find Maui's and you don't find the ways to make particular trades. It's absolutely difficult to recover. But aside from that, definitely not the biggest of problems. In all honesty, when you look at this deck, it's really confusing to a lot of different players. It absolutely catches opponents off guard as well. When people see Lantern, they assume it's aggro or mid range. They're definitely not expecting you to have 9 cost Maleficence in your deck. There's also definitely not counting on Be Prepared hanging around in this aggressive mid-range strategy, but that's honestly the key factor and the reason to play this deck, because Be Prepared ends up really just dominating certain board states. It's able to help you clean up against opponents when they assume they're more comfortable and they can go wide. You have the ability to recover really well with Rockstar Stitch, and of course, just your lower drops in general, along with the addition of Carefree Surfer, kind of just being able to pick up extra cards as well along the game. Maui is the absolute stud of this, and it's the key factor and reason to play Ruby in most cases. I think Maui is one of the most underutilized cards in the game. And when you pair him with Rapunzel to be able to heal him when they just leave him hanging around, it's a very, very punishing line of plays. If you're looking to hear even more about this deck, Scott and I are going to break down the deck in its entirety, do a nice deck tech for it tonight on the podcast live. So hit subscribe if you're not, so you know when we go live, 8:30 p.m. EST tonight, Tuesday. And of course, if this video has been helpful for you, smash that like button for me. Always helps it out. And lastly, I want to know in the comments, what was your favorite part of Lorcana OP Tour Miami? If you want to ask me, of course, I'll be discussing this at length on the podcast tonight, but 100% the commentary was my favorite. I had a blast. Shout out to Gabby, shout out to Free, and even shout out to our input for one top 4 match, Brandon. Really helpful to everyone, and it was just a great weekend all along. So let's get into the top 16 decks. Top 16, representing Team Green and Emerald World Order, we had Nick Alchkunis. I really want to say, from a content creator point of view, and just having communications with everyone through the week that came up, gave me a fist bump, gave me a hug, gave me a high five, whatever it was, just having a chat with me. Nick was incredible. Nick reached out to me a few months ago asking me the details of the event, because he had never really been a competitive player. He had never really traveled to big events. He was bringing his kid with him, and Nick was able to find a way into top 16, finishing 16th overall on tiebreakers, but he was able to do it. And that's a huge shout out. And it's really a testament to new players in general, knowing that don't count yourself out of events, go and play, enjoy it, but definitely don't count yourself out. Nick said to me he had never believed he was going to be in top 16. He actually had to change his flight in case he had been more successful in top 16. He would have been able to. He was worried he was going to have to concede. So always plan to win, never plan to fail when competing in these events. But shout out to Nick. Awesome story, awesome kid. It was great to meet and converse with you all weekend. Let's break down this deck list. So this was your your typical, semi-typical Emerald Sapphire list. This was a little bit more top end, going all the way to 7 with Hades, having the removal package with Let It Go, having the annoyance with cards like John Silver, Jasper, and Cusco, the draw, the only draw recovery, of course, from Mad Hatter, and the pseudo draw from Develop Your Brain. But this deck is very much an in-your-face aggro deck that has a more top-end removal package that some players aren't used to. Utilizing the ramp from Grandma Tala and Detective Mickey allows you to more safely get to those, whereas before, a lot of these decks were way more focused on being aggro, only going to 5, not playing any ramp whatsoever. But if you're going to go to 7, playing Grandma Tala and playing Mickey Mouse is a wonderful decision. Utilizing Phil again in this list to have more favorable trades with Tala and more favorable trades with Mickey Mouse when their opponents kind of leave them hanging out there around. Also works very well with your low strength characters in general. You never know when you actually can send Flynn Rider in for a trade, or of course sending a Jasper in for a higher favorable trade. 5-power Jasper is great. All in all, this list was pretty solid. Had a very unfortunate top 16 showing. I think it just in the end was able to pair against his worst matchup in Amber Steel, and he lost 2-0 in top 16. But again, congratulations to Nick getting the top 16 in his first competitive, high level competitive event. He was very excited, and I was honestly really happy to see him succeed and compete very well on the largest stage to date. Our next deck from the top 16 was Colby Jerish. Now, if you really look at this deck, it honestly, the core is all there. It looks like your run of a mill version of Ruby Amethyst. But then all of a sudden, you see 4-cost Elsa hanging out. You see the wardrobe hanging out. Jetsam was not an uncommon before this event, but it was definitely in higher numbers in the successful winning versions of this list. And then, of course, the evasive package all around with having Pongo, having Goofy. And yeah, this is just a really, really interesting take. Now, I need to really go into the Elsa in depth. And in all honesty, you're going to see Colby did a full deck review himself on the PPG channel, whether it might be going out today or it might be going out tomorrow. Whenever it goes out, I'll put it in the description. Put it in the description if you want to hear more about Colby's actual voice in this. But Colby and I go way back. We played multiple games together across the last several years. We also sat across from each other at Gen Con discussing the Gen Con events and the game itself. Colby's a gamer. He's a great player. And when I was speaking with Jose in the interview, Jose even said that this deck was really primed to be successful in the Amber Steel matchup. And that's a really tough, difficult matchup for Ruby Amethyst. We saw it kind of be dominated by Amber Steel, even in the top 16. The numbers for the overall being 67 and 66, but only 4 Ruby Amethyst were able to find top 16 success or better, showcasing that Amber Steel has the better matchup against that deck. So when you're really starting to design this deck to be successful, you need to look for niche options. And what Colby was able to find is very interesting. The 4-cost Elsa being a 4/4 and being a shiftable target that likely isn't removed is a big key factor. Colby said on the day he would play Elsa on 4. She would look very unthreatening. He'd be able to make a trade with Elsa. She'd be able to stick around. And then he would also follow up with a Maui, and Maui would come in. And then what would end up happening is his opponent would be a little fearsome of what Maui could just trade for again, holding back Rockstar Stitches and things like that. And all of a sudden now you're able to shift Elsa Spirit of Winter on turn 6 onto the big Elsa 4-cost. And then all of a sudden you can now utilize Maui to clean up another character. You can now have rushing Elsa Spirit of Winter to clean up the character and really just kind of remove the board so you can get to your end game while still threatening with a 3-lore Elsa that's likely sticking around. That play was something that Colby said he got players on all day. The choice for wardrobe is an inkable 3-cost, again, 4 willpower character that just sticks around. 4 willpower is not an easy stat stick for the Amber Steel metagame. The other key factor that I really want to point out for Elsa Queen Regent is that she is a 1-for-1 trade with Mad Hatter and with Cusco and pretty much any of the other 4 health threats that you see laying around in the game. So it really does represent a lot more than people were giving it credit for. Having the shiftability, all in all, great choice. And I think it's a great adaptation and addition to any deck playing Elsa Spirit of Winter. In all honesty, you should be considering playing Elsa Queen Regent as well. Shout out again to Colby for his top 16 finish. Our next top 16 deck list was the Amber Sapphire, played by Patrick Wall. Sorry again if I messed up that name. This is another, kind of deck that there was 11 registered of these in the list, and he was able to be successful, find a top 16, which is great. This was a pretty great deck, honestly, as like the scissor deck in the metagame, and I'm sure he played a really tight set in top 16. I didn't get to speak to Patrick, so I don't know exactly how his games went down. Aside from how I was, discussing with Colby, but all in all, this is a phenomenal list, and we're gonna break it down in its entirety. Of course, this was another one I got wrong on my predictions. I thought there was gonna be one of these in top four. Unfortunately, there was only 11 played. Only one of them got in top 16. I was actually betting on at least two or maybe even three of these getting in top 16. That's not what happened, not with the numbers. So we'll take the L on that one. But again, shout out to Patrick and awesome showing for this. Let's break down the list. Amber Sapphire is a deck that really does play very, very well into a metagame of Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst. However, I think the uptick of Carefree Surfers ended up probably playing a dividends in this particular match. What I do think that it was capitalizing on before is that it was very good into some of the less mid-rangey, less control versions without Carefree Stitch. But the addition of Carefree Stitch definitely making it more difficult. More players being more committed to the wheel of Whole New World and Rockstar and Stitch really kind of broke it down. And I think even the more Lantern versions makes it more difficult for this deck to be successful with it also. So the fact that Amber Steel really did adapt and change to a different type of setting made this particular matchup a lot worse, most likely. Still good enough to get into a top 16. I'm sure they still preyed on Ruby Amethyst all day. This deck is excellent into Ruby Amethyst. Really does just completely brutalize that matchup when, as long as you're able to keep your Hades going and the Hades loops going and utilizing, big Hades to remove and utilizing Carefree Surfers to constantly draw, getting favorable trades, utilizing Maximus to actually get Rapunzel use out of the mirrors. Again, this is a typical thing we're now seeing is that Phil was a staple in all the Sapphire decks we looked at. Being able to, create more advantage for your Mickey Mouse, more advantage for your Maximuses, and honestly, even more advantage for your Rapunzels for trading. This is a really sweet list. I will say, I'm not positive we had Patrick on stream on day one, but there was a version of this list that was very committed to You Have Forgotten Me. And honestly, it didn't look spectacular on the day. I think You Were Forgotten Me had several games on camera where it felt like it was very crippling, but opponents were able to just draw out of it. And in all honesty, this might just be a hot take of mine. I was really, trying to say that if you're going to play the card, you got to be committed to it. And the players that were committed to it still lost that game. They still lost that round. There was a match, I think it was in round 6 against Colby, where it was, a You Were Forgotten Me deck. And You Were Forgotten Me 2 turns in a row. Turns 4 and turns 5 took everything away from Colby. Colby didn't have a mirror, but Colby's deck was just good cards in all honesty. And every turn he just successfully drew and got out of it and won the game in time. So while the card looks great in the moment and taking things away, if you don't have a way to capitalize on that and actually really, strengthen your position in the game and go above and beyond, then the card ends up falling flat. So if I was looking to really make this deck better, I would genuinely consider taking You Have Forgotten Me out of it. I felt that card, just really fell flat on the weekend and just didn't do enough at all. And in games where it punished opponent, taking all of the resources away, it still wasn't enough. So for me, that's the first cut I think I go for. But all in all, shout out to Patrick Heel. Let's get into the top 8 decks. Roger Pera was another thorn in my side. I'm just kidding. He was the reason why Emerald made top 8. So I got that one wrong on the checklist as well. I'm okay with it because this deck is sweet. So let's break it down. Roger Pera's top 8 deck really removes a lot of the issues that are caused by only playing Amethyst. Being able to transform the Emerald core into steel gives you some very interesting takes. And the first and foremost thing here is no one cost characters. So we don't have Olaf, we don't have Archimedes, we don't have Duke or anything like that. We just got away from them. Instead, we're playing more 2-cost characters. So we're playing Aladdin's and we're playing Flynn's, of course. But both Aladdin and Flynn start threatening on turn 2 with 2 lore. And then we follow up with a potential bodyguard like Hercules that we also can't capitalize on with the Amethyst list with just Emerald. So Steel does also offer us a way to bodyguard our cheaper characters to get more legs out of them if they're ignored. The other key factor here is grab your swords and Tinkerbell and smash. All these cards are just simple things that Amethyst has no reach on. And of course, you lose the draw power, but that's okay when you say, I have a whole new world and I can just reset the board if I curve out well. Curving out really incredibly well with this deck is so great. Obviously, no one cost card, doesn't really need it, and that's fine. You should understand that when you're playing steel, you really don't need one cost cards unless you're trying to be extremely aggressive, because cards like Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell and Smash buy you the resources back later by removing those cards just innately through the game, rather than creating card disadvantage through yourself by trading your one cost into their one cost if they already got more and things like that. So totally fine with not having any of those. But in the end, this deck is just about curving really, really well and still being able to play into the board state and control the board state as well. The other interesting play that I had seen happen a bunch was Tinkerbell Most Helpful being shifted onto. I actually think it's one of those, kind of gotcha moments for players. When we see Tiny Tacticians, we always think Great Fairies. When we see Tinkerbell Most Helpful, it might not even be on your mind that your opponent can shift in on turn 5. And I'm sure that happened a bunch and really caught people off guard. In all honesty, me commentating the event, the first time it happened, it even happened to me going, you know what? I didn't see that line. I totally forgot that this was a viable option because we don't see steel paired with emerald enough to even consider it. And even in all my testing and things like that, I don't see this deck very often whatsoever, on Pixelborn and things like that. So when it happened, definitely caught me off guard as a commentator. Very cool to see that it was successful in this event. I think this is a really strong and interesting deck, in all honesty. I definitely, personally, for my money, this is a better deck than Amethyst. If I really wanted to be Team Emerald, I think I would throw away the Amethyst cards and start buying into the Steel. Top 10 or top 8, along with another version of this list in top 16. And I do believe they were teammates. They were both playing the same deck. So like 2 out of 9 players making top 32 with the exact same list is a really, really strong showing for it. Shout out to them. This was a great deck. This was a fun deck to watch. It did end up going down in top 8 to an Amber Steel matchup, which just really shows to me that you gave yourself a chance by playing Steel, getting the top 8, beating other Amber Steels on the way, because at the end of the day, when it comes to Steel mirrors, it almost always comes down to who had the better Tinkerbell and Grab Your Swords, or who drew more of them, or who had the better A Whole New World, recovery and things like that. So all in all, I think if you want to play Emerald and you're really stuck on Emerald, I'd look into transforming into the Steel version for sure. Now, with that, let's take a look at the top 16 bracket from this event. So as you can see here, I did get the Amber Steel correct in my predictions. It's theoretically one that we can say I absolutely got correct. I still believe that the Amber Ruby having a top 32 finish with a winning record and only 3 game losses is enough for me to be happy about going at least 2-3 in the predictions. But nonetheless, you can see a ton of Amber Steel all over this one, all the way. We had multiple mirror matches to be found throughout that. We had one in top 16. We had one in top 8. There was one in top 4. And the finals, all seeing Amber Steel mirror matches. So without a doubt, that deck is the winner. Without a doubt, Amber is the best ink of this event. So huge congratulations to Jose. And let's take a look at his deck list. Here we have the winning deck list of the event, played by Jose Feliciano. This was honestly a very, very complete deck. We got to watch Jose in multiple rounds in the top 16. He finished in the top 8 on day 1. He played very, very well. It was actually, I was very, very impressed with all of the lines he played. You could definitely tell that he was committed to this deck, that he had been playing the deck. He was familiar with his lines. He knew how to play against the mirror. He knew how to play against Amber Ruby. And in all of the, he knew how to play against Ruby Amethyst. And, you know, when you win, an event to this size, 214 checked in registered players. Uh, it doesn't happen on accident. And in all honesty, sometimes, yes, there is some luck involved. And I'm sure Jose would probably tell you for himself at some point he felt a little lucky on the event. I know that I did when I was successful in major events, that at the end, it feels really good to be good, but it also feels really good to be lucky and good. And to win events to this extent, sometimes you got to get a little lucky as well, but that takes nothing away from how successful this deck was and how successful and well he played. In the finals, I thought he played impeccable. He made decisions that really altered the game. And I was very, very impressed. It was very fun to call the finals, call the top four, and just see everything he did incredibly well. And this deck was represented incredibly well. We had seen, like I said, 5 or 6 different versions of this list in top 32. The deck lists are in the description below, so you can see them there. If you want to see the top 32 decks, they're all on inkdecks.com. And in all honesty, this list was just pristine. It really does do kind of everything you want for it. The commitment to playing a whole new world, Rockstar Stitch, Carefree Surfer, and Lantern is something that really wasn't fully enforced going into this weekend. But from this weekend, I think you're going to see a lot of lists that looks very similar to this. The questionable cards that you might consider cutting or maybe the one of hook. If you really don't like the uninkable count, you can find something else to do with it. Maybe you want to play more mirrors because now there's going to be, maybe you want to play more beast because now there's more lanterns. So beast just gets a little bit more of an upscale swing again. We saw a beast take out a lantern in the finals and it was oppressive. It was a game altering play, even if Jose didn't know it at the time. Kept his opponent from playing a Tinkerbell. And honestly, his opponent played 1 card in 5 turns because of the play lines that happened in the finals. So all in all, really great play and really great success from that. If you're looking to hear from Jose himself, I interviewed him at the very end of the event. It was the first player. I was the first person able to get him on screen, talk about the win, talk about his event, talk about the deck. That video is right here. Check it out for me. Enjoy. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. If you haven't yet, like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what your favorite part of Miami TCG Con was, because I had a blast and I hope everyone else did. See you guys in the next video.